Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
Dustin Rea.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're going to argue about the pains caused by differing abstractions. And what we're talking about here is abstractions like time and money, where we all agree, or we don't all agree on what they are, but the computers need to know what they are, and everyone needs to agree on something. Whether you have everything stored as date time strings with time zones, or UTC with milliseconds, you need to agree. And if you don't agree, you're going to have all kinds of pain that you will discover later. So Dustin, you were wanted to kick this off. So tell us about your time zone pain.
Yeah. So there's different. I want to kind of paint the picture from every perspective in the organization because it's something that I think it's not just something that engineers feel. It's the entire team will feel this problem. So if you're I'll start with the engineering side, right? If you're the engineer, what this looks like is maybe you have engineer A and engineer B. Maybe they live in different time zones and they have different opinions about how to handle time. Maybe engineer A and B have never talked about their differences in how they view time and dates.
That's
So
usually
herein
what
lies
it
the
is.
problem. Right.
It didn't occur to anybody to actually discuss it before somebody made a decision.
Right. And it's not like a malice thing. Like I think it's a common experience for us to think, oh, probably everybody on my team thinks how I do. We're typically aligned, right? It's like, oh, well, actually, on these very fine details that matter in big ways, like the Office Space joke. Well, it's supposed to be a fraction of a penny. It's like, well, if you get that wrong, it's a big difference, you know. So that's kind of what this looks like from the engineering side. So you'll kind of run into bugs where you're getting a bug report back, potentially if you're dealing with date times, like things are coming in on the wrong day. Like customers are reporting, I logged this on this day, but it's coming in on a different day. Typical textbook
Mm-hmm.
time zone discrepancy. So there's some tactical ways that we would get through that, and I think we'll cover some of those later in a later talk. But that's the engineering viewpoint, right? From the product viewpoint, it's kind of like it feels like I keep asking for this thing, but I'm getting bug reports back from customer service, and it's like, why can't we get this right? Like it feels like it should be easy. You know, it's so obvious. It's like everybody has dates and times, so like it feels like it should be something that all of us just get. But the devil is in the details there too, right? So
Well,
on
the
the
devil's in consistency.
Right. So, like from a product standpoint, you may have certain things that you're calculating in the back end, right? Like from a reporting and calculation standpoint. So those things need to be standardized as well, and that's more of like an engineering, I think, problem. But from the product side, I would want to see things like, well, my questions to the engineering team would be things like, how do we consistently handle dates and date times and display for the user depending on their time zone across the software, right? Like, is there some standardized approach that we use? That's kind of like the question I think that would kick off this discussion from the product side. Uh, then there's one other, I think, important perspective that's just real quick, the business perspective side. So from the business perspective side, what this looks like is I feel like my product and engineering team costs more than it should. Like it feels like we're like churning a lot, like we're doing a lot of work, but we're not necessarily making so much progress on the roadmap because it feels like we're spending money on and time on trivial things. So I think that starts to get into the stories.
Yeah, so I think to summarize that, it's really expensive to not have a standard
Hmm.
because it will keep coming back as bugs because maybe it's obvious that things should be displayed in the user's local time,
Right.
but maybe they should be displayed in the time when something executed. In finance, this was a tricky one where all of our times were stored UTC, fine. But if you did a trade in US, like if you traded stocks in the US and you traded stocks in London and you traded stocks in Tokyo, do you want your stock trades to be in like the execution times? Are those local execution times or are
Hmm.
those your relative time zone execution times?
Right.
And there isn't a specifically right or wrong answer. That's a product that becomes a product question where
Right.
now the view could change. On the back end, dear God, if you're not consistent, you will get this, as you say, you will get this wrong everywhere all the time, and every piece of code will need an adapter.
But it'll come in as individual reports. You know, oh, this is broken in this weird way. Well, reality is it's probably a systematic, issue. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit more about, you've mentioned UTC a few times. You want to talk about like what UTC is for some people that may not know what that is?
So with time, there's basically two strategies. There's the Unix time, which is seconds since midnight 1970, January 1st, 1970, as expressed as a long number. And then there's also the option to have milliseconds, which is just 4 digits longer. And that is sort of what most people use consistently on the back end. The alternative is a string, which is some form of year, month, day, and hours, minutes, seconds, maybe milliseconds, and a time zone. And that is always trickier because the computer will never format the time zone correctly. If you want a lot of fun doing .NET work on installed machines for local computers and then trying to cast all of those date times into UTC is non-trivial, or it wasn't 12 years ago. And you would just get all these strings and all these numbers, and it would all depend on the user's system configuration, which would also depend on the user's physical location.
Right.
And there was no .NET way to convert that back to UTC because it wouldn't know by the time it serialized it. It would no longer know what the local time on the computer was.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with the string approach is everybody's settings can be ambiguous. Like Americans do year, day, month, or month, day, year rather. Europeans tend to do year, month, day, right from biggest to little. Some people do day, month, year, ascending. Americans are the weird ones. And, 24-hour time, 12-hour time, AM, PM. Like there are infinite colons, dashes. It's all you're opening up a can of worms. But if you have a standard, you have a standard. And if you don't want infinite pain, everything on your back end has to store the data in the same standard. And you have to be religiously hostile to any alternative approach. It doesn't matter what approach you have, but you must be zealous and unyielding in refusing to allow any deviation on the back end.
I like to think of, and we've been talking a lot about dates and times. We'll want to talk about currency as well, but I think of these things as like once they're set, they're kind of the laws of physics of your product. Like these are the laws. We don't break these. It has to work this way across the board. Other things are more flexible, and then that kind of brings to, well, if you want to change these rules, there's like a whole rule changing process to make sure anything that is affected by these is tracked and updated. Currency has the same problem. We were joking before the start of this about storing money in various formats and the headaches that can lead to, and how I know I'll raise my hand. As my first experience working with money as a programmer, I definitely made that mistake, and I immediately realized why to never do it again. So that scar is almost like what what I live with when I go to do it now. But how do we prevent people from having the scar?
So for everyone who the joke is, you can tell an amateur is written something about money if they used a float or a double or any non-precise way of handling the numbers, because rounding errors are a thing, and anybody who's doing money with something that has rounding errors should not be doing things with money. It's kind of unambiguous. If you are, and I've seen this in production systems. I've seen it in production systems written by financial people. you're looking at it like this is going to leak pennies, and when you're moving billions of dollars, leaking pennies is really bad.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I've definitely seen a system where an amount to be paid was stored as a string, and the string was like 26.32, and then that was cast into a different type, and then multiplied by 100 to get the penny amount
Yep.
to make it the standard that other systems use, that the other libraries use. And I've seen bugs related to that, and they're usually off by a penny or two.
Yeah.
I've seen it many times. Definitely a problem.
Yeah, it also plays a role in when you want to expand internationally. Like what I've always read is the kind of best approach is to use the lowest denomination in whatever currency you're
Mhm.
working in, and then that lends itself to naturally, as the engineer, wanting to work in like a full integer versus this like kind of decimal floating point value.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
doesn't work because you're assuming that all numbers are in decimal, so that there are 10, right? There are 100 pennies
right,
in a
right,
dollar. There are now 100 pence in a pound. That wasn't true 60 years ago. There are still currencies that
mm.
use eighths.
Hmm.
You cannot represent them as a decimal. I mean, you can, but
Mm.
because they're eighths. But you there is no jump between the eighths. It
Right,
gets wonky. There are also currencies that have multiple decimals or multiple
right,
fractions. It's hard.
right,
Uh, it's gotten easier over the years. Like there are now money data types that
right,
handle
right.
this. So sort of the gold standard, if you're not worried about performance, is a money data type, which will have the whole number of the amount before the decimal place and the
Mhm.
integer number amount after the decimal place, or some other representation for the rare currencies that need it.
Mm.
And that would be the gold standard. And then it has its own add and subtract functions in there, and it handles all of that, and it's abstracted away, and you can use it. And those have existed for at least 10 years,
Mhm.
maybe more. Like I remember 25 years ago, going back to pounds and pence, if you were doing them on Windows, pounds is capital P, pence is lowercase p, Windows is not case sensitive. It couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah,
And so that
great.
was fun.
So I think the kind of the takeaway here is the as far as money goes, for sure, you should be looking for money safe libraries, and there should
Hmm.
probably be some type of
Mm-hmm.
documentation that points you towards the one that your team uses. Because I've also seen one person will use one, another person uses another. This happens with date libraries all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
then now you're essentially mapping between these two different ways of thinking about the same concept, and that adds a lot of cognitive load and weight
Yeah.
on the business.
Well, and cost, right? So
Right.
if I've got a system and I'm storing everything as a whole number, and you are storing things as a string, and you've got your date library that works fine, and I've got my date library that works fine, and there are date library, and they can cast between the two that easily, but it still means that everyone has to consider what format the date is in and
Hmm.
whether or not they need to cast it for this next step. And so it is a load, that is more expensive in developer time. And God, I can imagine subtle AI bugs
Yeah.
are going to proliferate along those lines.
Right. Yeah, and I think even to mitigate against that, both with AI and with you know like larger teams, it's like about discoverability, right? Like, can
Mm-hmm.
you point everybody that's working in the code base towards this centralized way of operating? And it's almost
Mm-hmm.
like you have an internal abstraction around whatever it is that you do, and it's like everybody has to use this thing in order to operate with these models of the business. And I think that's where product can get really involved in the tests as well.
So, at a human level, what do you do if humans refuse to go along? Like I'm using UTC, and Isaac is using strings, and there's a thing that says we're going to do strings or UTC, and the other one won't give ground. Like, this is the kind of thing that causes microservices to,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
microservices are a result of social failure.
Right. Right.
As somebody who used to be a huge proponent of them, at this point,
Sorry,
I
I really
believe
are. That's a great quote.
Yeah, that is a good.
uh, somebody's
That's a quote.
uh, you microservices make sense because of a social failure. You have developers who just can't work together, and so the
Right.
easiest way to solve that is to go to microservices,
And
and
they
it's
tout
worth
that
it.
as a, yeah.
Right,
There
and
you
then your strength becomes a weakness becomes a strength. All
Right.
the teams can do whatever they want. You have a contract, and there's the bare boundary.
Right. But it's not ideal for the org. Like if you were to think as a, like if you were a hive mind of
Mm-hmm.
people and you had one, if you, that's what we call alignment, right? If you had a true
Mm-hmm.
alignment, then the organization would say, well, I leave my opinions at the door for what's best for the hive, right? Like,
Mhm.
which is the
Mm-hmm.
organization. So it's like if you think in that way, the like game theory wise, the best that an organization can do is the opposite of like a microservices approach, where it's like we agree on these standards and we use them as an efficiency lever
Mm.
because it's best
Right.
for the org. We can get more out of it and do more meaningful work rather than churning on the laws of physics of our own product, you know?
Right. Well, that's the old joke: is there's nothing more efficient than a well-written monolith.
Right.
I've yet to see one.
Nice. I haven't heard that one.
Right? Having all the code in one place and available to be used is great, but it just lends itself to immediate bad practices.
Right. Right. Yeah. So how do you start to mitigate? It's like a like an entropy kind of problem as you kind of grow and scale. Because in a small team, like a 3-person team, can maintain a like a nearly pristine code base given enough time between cycles.
Yeah.
But like
Or
if you
not even
expand
like
that out to 3 or 4 teams of teams with varying opinions and egos, it becomes significantly more difficult to maintain that same level of efficiency where everybody's using the same stuff.
right, and it may not even make sense because you've spread
Right.
out the problem domain further.
Right. But even if you spread out the problem domain, there's still like if there's one team dedicated to like maintaining date time library time currency like all of these things, and then let's say I have a kind of real life example of this. Another product is acquired and brought into the
Mm.
ecosystem, and it's in a completely different stack or whatever, and it's like it's really, so it's like how do you now leverage that? Do you make bindings, or does the team, like what if the team just goes rogue, which I've also seen in several organizations, and then it becomes like no one, even if that team's practices are now the best practices in the org, no one
Hmm.
else is getting any leverage out of it because it's a black box.
Right. Well, I like this question a lot because it becomes a rewrite question. Right? You bought
Yeah.
a product, or you bought a piece of software, the whole piece of software, not like a
Right.
license, and it has different standards than your standards, and you could rewrite it, which we obviously would hate, but if you,
Right.
because this is the Never Rewrite show,
Yeah, of course.
and but it's like, oh well, this product uses datetime strings, and we use UTC, we use decimal, and we want them to merge, but there's not really any business value in it
Exactly. You know,
except the ongoing tax of having now two standards.
right. It's
Mhm.
the tax. So it's like, how do you, this is the one thing I have struggled with before. It's like, because there, if you have a very, like if each individual in the org has a very self fulfilling, like a self serving mentality, then they won't be thinking, well, where is the org in 10 years? And I've paid that tax for 10 straight years. And the
Mm-hmm.
cost of that is now insane. Like thinking about
Mm-hmm.
like how much else you could have done, right? That's how I think about it. And it's like, but if I'm thinking about just only my own self, then the short term gains make my career look more effective. Like I look like a more effective leader, even though I've actually shortchanged the future through my decision making because I just left that part out because no one sees it unless it's called out. But I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
hidden, if you're the CEO or the executive team or the investors, it's like, well, where is some of this money going? That's where you're losing money. Like, because I think this is we're moving into the era of, you wrote on this, Jeffrey, about the balloon, the SAS
Mm.
balloon losing air, and I think kind of the similar thing. Like, there's a trend of like in this next era of businesses, apart from like the AI bubble and all of that, but the core businesses that have niches and all of this stuff, it's about being profitable. It's no longer like, let me throw 100 mil at the problem and then figure it out. It may not even be $100 million problem, but there's, several businesses out there building software for 5, 10, 15, 20, $50 million problems, and they still have these exact same problems that we see as we scale. And a lot of what we're talking about here is, I talk a lot about the stages that you go through as a business. These are like
Mm-hmm.
multi-product platform problems. Like when you acquire software and you want to integrate it to your platform, if you already don't have your platform standards down, you could be introducing a third, fourth standard, and it's not just doubling your team, you're quadrupling or adding additional burden on everybody. And
Mm.
that's not like, there's no line item in accounting that shows you that.
Right. Uh, complexity is exponential, not linear.
Yes. Yes. So I think my point is nipping the complexity. Like, what we don't need help making it more complex is my point.
Yes. You at all points push towards reducing complexity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the real like saver, I think, in these. Like, if you want to build a profitable software company,
Hmm.
these are the things you pay attention to. It's not just like, how can I go to market and get as many eyeballs as possible. That is one factor. But if you don't have infinite investor money, that's not an option.
So if you wanted to do a hockey stick scaling company, then you don't care about this. It's if you
I
wanted
don't
to
think
build
that's
a.
true either. I
Hmm.
personally don't share. I think that some people have that opinion. I personally don't share that opinion because I think that the efficiency compounds. If complexity
Mm-hmm.
is exponential, then solving complexity should be exponential gains.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not spending my, let's say, so you start small, right, and then you're trying to get to this $1 million. That's kind of your $1 million ARR is kind of your first big thing. Okay, now you're like kind of a pretty real business at that point. You've got many ways that your business can go out of business at that point, but it's surviving, right? So then, like,
Mm-hmm.
getting to the next like level requires kind of a different way of thinking. And if you're bootstrapping and you don't have investor money, if you spend money in these bigger circles on things that should have been solved down here, you're like shooting yourself in the foot to make it through much bigger hurdles that are harder to jump over. So to me, solving these problems that are going to trip us up that look small now, they're going to make these big hurdles become almost impossible to get over. To where now you need to get to, you're worried about getting to Series C because you're blowing money inefficiently to build the value that you need for your market. But there's no line item showing you that. You're just thinking this is the cost of doing business because there's no visibility into it unless these things are bubbled up to leadership. So that to me, even if you want to build the hockey stick company,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be really hard to do that if you're spending all of your resources like circling back on the same things. Like, you would need a truly exponential investment to make that hockey stick, and I would argue you won't see a return, or the return time horizon is so long that like any like normal person starting a business in this era, I don't think that that's going to be the most viable option going forward, especially as like the tech companies get bigger and have more general solutions. Like, a lot of the scale type problems are solved, so it's more about the like these micro problems. And like I'm saying, it may not be a $200 market, so there's just not the resources to build that. But that doesn't mean the problems aren't worth solving and that the company shouldn't be started. It's just about
Mm.
how you build them, and they still can be hockey sticks, because going from 100,000 to 5 million, like in 3 years, is to me a pretty up and to the right motion, for someone starting with a bootstrap. If you don't have a seed, right? Talking like, there's a difference between having a seed and not, I think. Both are valid
Yeah.
approaches, but
How do you distinguish, like, whenever you see, like if you see a problem like this and you want to tackle it before it becomes a bigger issue that compounds? There's 1,000 other problems I'm sure that the business runs into. Like, how do you
Mm-hmm.
surface that as being the one that's the tax that's going to cause the most damage over time versus these other things that seem just as important.
I think that's like one of the reasons I'm on the soapbox about this is I work with a lot of these businesses where they're in like what I call the newborn stage, where it's like this is a baby. We have to be really careful. Any wrong move will kind of like kill this. So to me, if there's like this existential risk that could just take it down, then like we need to address that. That doesn't mean to say that this will always be the most important problem in your path. And neither will it be solved all at once. That's the other thing too. I think it's not about getting it perfection on any one iteration. It's about constantly removing the friction when like dealing with these things.
Well, this is also the kind of thing where if you have experienced developers or somebody who is experienced and they just make the decisions and they write it down, then you never have this problem. It's like it becomes a problem that you never have, and that's the most efficient way to solve it is to just not have it in the first place.
Yes, but that I would argue that can also, you may have a false solution to the problem. And what I mean by that is what you're referring to is, I think, a version of tribal knowledge. So yeah, you got lucky that you hired the right person that had the right mentality in that moment. But that's like saying I bought the right lottery ticket. If I'm building a business, I want to be able to consistently, with some margin of error, get that back, right? And like maybe that person leaves, it's the next person, there's the bus problem, there's a million reasons why you can't like as a business owner, I think you can't, like that's a great thing when it happens, but it's not the strategy, but it's part of it. And I think it's not just on the engineering. So it's like there's two pieces to this. If engineers are loud about it, but say they can't communicate the value in business terms, product will ignore it because they won't see the compounding tax that they're paying for it. They'll just be like, man, this dev team has a lot of bugs. Annoying. But it's really about that we never stopped to like get that nailed down, because maybe that same product manager works with 2 or 3 different teams who use microservices and they have slightly different approaches, and team A's never talk to team B because they talk through the product manager. And then, that's since that knowledge isn't there about how this can become a problem because it hasn't been communicated. And I think that's kind of like where these problems sneak in. So like no matter what level you're at the business, whether you are the executive, the product manager, the engineer, even the customer support person, I would be asking, can someone point me to the in English documentation of our expectations around dates, times, and money and time zones? Because even as a customer support person answering chats, if someone reports a bug, but it's not a bug, it's a misunderstanding about the calculation or whatever, like I would want to be able to kind of identify that and then route it to the right team to solve the bug or update documentation or whatever it is. But to me, this is it's an organization-wide problem. And if anybody in the organization can convince the other nodes in the network this is a true problem, then you chip away at it. It's not like we stop everything to solve it. It's like phases.
So we are running a little long. Should we stop and come back next time for a discussion about how to technically solve these problems? So we've covered the social aspect.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
I'm Isaac Askew. Sorry. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.